Welcome back to part two of the Digital Transformation Roadmap and the author of that book, David Rogers. Welcome back, sir.
Thanks so much, Aidan. It's great to be here back with you. Great to be talking with you about the book.
It's
Very happy.
brilliant. Me and David were just talking off air about how I think overwhelmed people feel when they realize how much work there is to be done. They don't realize that this is a total overhaul of the way we have been taught to do business. And that is the
Yeah.
huge challenge. Towards the end of the book, you talk about technical debt, but a huge part of this is psychological debt.
Or as I've heard it called sometimes, organizational debt. It's like you have these layers of organizational processes that have built up over time and kind of become very encrusted, uh, like layers of the Earth's core. Just the same way that technology, when you talk about serious technical debt, you've got these layers of systems. I've worked with banks. They've got over 100 different applications that are all like trying to talk to each other. And some of them were built 30 years ago on COBOL, and they're just layered up and unearthing to really solve the underlying problems. You've got to do some archaeology. It's the same thing with the organizations, these like processes and budgeting and resourcing and metrics and KPIs and how meetings are run and all of these different things at different levels of the company that actually all impact your ability to change and transform. And so just coming in and saying, "Oh, we're going to change a piece here, we're going to have a team or a squad that does something different." That may be your starting point. That may be your like chipping into the rock and your entry into this giant edifice, but it's got to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper if you're really going to drive the change.
Even to your point about it's built on Cobalt or some old language that is maybe not agile, maybe it's not even built for a cloud platform, etc. Because that
Yeah.
speaks to actually the skill set as well. Because this has happened to me where I've had developers in the past using old languages and they were very
Yeah.
resistant to use new languages, mainly because they didn't understand them. And this talks to the capabilities link that's so important as well that maybe we'll just mention here because we probably won't get to it today.
Yeah. That's the fifth step. And as what I call the roadmap in the book, the framework is about what I broadly call capabilities. And that's really three very interconnected things. It's about, do you have the right kind of digital technology? This is information architecture in the cloud, modular, moving away from monolithic, one gigantic application to decomposing it into lots of small microservices using APIs to connect them and so forth. And that's a technical shift, but actually, what I've seen and learned, it's much more profoundly an organizational shift because when you actually change the information architecture into these small components, organization follows technology in this case. You have to set up individual teams to take ownership of each of these microservices. And that naturally brings about this kind of squad based or small multifunctional team or this kind of problem defined organizational structure, which you see all the big companies that are digital native that operate at scale, the Googles, the Amazons, and so forth, they all are built around this. So there's the technology, the talent, which is not just what are the technical skills we need, but also bringing in people with different backgrounds from inside or outside of our industry with entrepreneurial experience and not just experience working inside big companies. So, what's the kind of range and mix of talent we need, the talent gaps we have currently, and how do we manage that? Right? Not just hiring people. It's not even just training people. It's also, I find one of the biggest stumbling blocks in that talent life cycle is retaining the key talent that you are going to need for your digital future. Because you can hire the smartest people if you've got a paycheck, the most talented product managers from Roblox or Amazon or Meta or wherever, if they are stuck in a morass of bureaucracy inside your big company, they are going to leave. And then in addition to the talent, it's the culture, really being clear. I know this is one of the things you talk about in your book, but really thinking about defining what is the culture we need as an organization. How does our culture need to shift and evolve if it's really going to match our strategy, where we're headed as a company? Defining that clearly, communicating it, not just clearly, but in ways that really stick with people using stories and symbols and symbolic actions and so forth. But then lastly, enabling that culture to actually happen by really looking carefully at all the processes in your company and figuring out which ones are blocking the cultural behaviors you want. How by changing those processes can you make it easier for people to behave in the way that you want and the culture that you need?
We're going to take a step back and we're going to start with vision. Then we were going to talk about how to select your priorities and then how to validate as well. All key steps in the digital transformation roadmap. But one that often gets overlooked and one where so much of this all comes tumbling down is governance, or step four, managing growth at scale. And I'm going to tee you up, David, with a beautiful opening to this chapter as well. You say, as you start to apply the process of experimentation to digital ventures in your own business, you are now ready to begin the next step of the DX roadmap, repeating this process at scale across your organization. Major challenges must be addressed. Which ventures should be funded? Who will decide when to shut some down? What rules should be waived for new ventures at the start? How will the successes be handed off to the core business? What will you do with digital ventures that don't fit your current organizational structure? There are a plethora of these questions that we don't consider because we just go straight into building or falling in love with an idea. After validation, which is an absolutely core step, you have to have
Yeah.
a governance. David's going to take us through that. Over to you.
And this is also a gap I see where folks who come in who have been in a product role or in an innovation role at a startup, or maybe you are that person who is working at Meta or Amazon or Google, and now you've been hired into a bank or a agribusiness or a professional services firm or an industrial manufacturer. And it's almost like you take for granted. You're like, well, I know what I've got to do on my team. We've got to get close to the customer. We've got to validate. We've got to test. We've got to find the problem. We got to keep building and speed, shorten that cycle of sprints. But you take for granted the sort of organizational infrastructure that was around you in that other business. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, why is everything so hard now that I'm working in a 100-year-old consumer packaged goods company? It's because of the governance, right? So the challenge for leaders here is it's not enough. It might be your starting point, your kind of organizational or sort of cultural proof case to have a team build a great digital innovation that customers love and captures value for the business. And then people start to get excited. But if you're going to repeat this, if you're going to scale this across an established business with different priorities, competing priorities, you have to look at these rules of how do we manage different projects and priorities and goals and teams and experimentation at scale. So part of this is understanding this is what we would call it a portfolio, right? As we'll talk about, and I know all the listeners to your show already know, when you start an innovation journey, you don't know what's going to work. And you place bets, right? So you're thinking about a variety, a funnel, if you will. You're starting with pursuing a number of ventures, knowing that most of them will not work out. So how do we do this? Some of the key elements. One of the key elements I'll start on governance is this relationship between what I call teams and boards. And it's obvious, say, in the startup world, but it's just not there in most established companies. So you've got two kind of groups of people that have to work together and they have to have very clear decision rights. So the first is the teams. Those are the ones who are actually doing the innovation, doing the experimenting and the rapid validation. And then you've got the boards, and these are the folks who sponsor them, who give them an initial green light, say, okay, we're giving you a little bit of runway, a little time, a little money, go for it, come back, and we're going to make a decision on whether or not we continue to fund you. Right? They're the ones who sponsor, who green light, and then who iteratively fund that team. But they also should be doing a bit more, right? Like a great venture capital investor, they should also be advising, right? They should be some of your wise counsel, giving you perspectives on the market, making introductions. Because you're in a big company, one of the most important parts of this is actually acting as a liaison or an advocate within the organization. So all of a sudden, you want to do something next, and you need something from legal or from supply chain, or you need an introduction to an outside partner who works with the marketing team. This is, again, a critical role of this group called the board. And different names, it might be an innovation board, a technology innovation board, a growth board is a term you'll hear. What you want to avoid, and it's quite common still, just with a whole group of different companies last week, and I would say the majority, when I asked them who sponsors innovation, they gave some version of the single sponsor model. Well, the CEO signs off. Like, who approves when you do something different that's not just regular operations continuing to improve the company, but like a big, interesting innovation bet? Oh, it's the CEO. You've either got one person who has the power, oh, it's the CTO, or you have a few different senior executives who each individually, if they want to step up and put their name on something, they can sponsor it, right? This is a terrible model, right? It's suboptimal for the team because it doesn't matter who that one person is, they are not going to give you the support that a group, a diverse, interesting, well-chosen group that's on this, board would do, because they're always going to have more perspectives, more insights, and so forth. It is much worse for the organization because when you have a single sponsor, they will go to bat for you. They will marshal the resources for you, and then they will never give up. They will never back down. They will never admit this idea is not working because it's them. They're the only one who approved it. So whether it's because the classic pet project, or your sponsor has fallen in love with a solution, you're working it, you're iterating it, you're talking to the customer every day, you probably at some point realize this is not going to work. Like, we should pivot or shut this down. But the sponsor will be like, no, no, you got to try this. You got to try this. They're so passionately, they're emotionally attached to it, or they're just, it's reputational. They don't want to admit that this thing that was your idea and they stupidly signed off on it, but now they can't, they only know that was foolish of them to sign off. So the single sponsor model, just as a repeatable model, obviously anything it could work in a given instance, but as a repeatable, scalable model, it does not work. So you need to set up really clear decision rights on, like, what does the team do and decide on, and what does the board decide on? And that I would say is the first element of governance in large organizations.
Brilliant, man, brilliant. I have to say, not only just the idea of the sponsor falling in love with the idea, but sometimes, as you say, deep down in your gut, this isn't working. And we had the great pleasure on the show. We had Joe Bauer on the show talking about resource allocation. He introduced that whole
Yeah.
concept of resource allocation. And what the core message was that a manager is almost like this immiscible layer in an organization that allows some ideas bubble to the top. But
Yeah.
they will decide on allocating resources not based on the idea, but based on the person behind the idea and whether they have a track record of success. So you can see why so many ideas die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. So that brings me to the point of green lighting. So resource allocation, I really think of two stages because there's a nuance that you want to get right at both. Green lighting is just the very first tranche of resourcing, right? So it's going from 0 to 1. So it's a different beast than all that what comes next, which is iterative funding. All these repeated meetings, do we keep going or not? Keep going or not? Keep going or not? Green lighting, I actually advise executives, someone who's in the sponsor role, who's on the board ideally, to not try to pick the best idea, right? Because that puts you in the position of trying to think about what's going to succeed or not. And that is not your job. And it's not your job because you have no idea. You do not know. That, like, the whole point of experimentation is you do not know what's going to work until you get out there. So it's not a bad idea to actually consider team, right? Particularly if you've got a process where it's, I don't know, something like a hackathon or an open pitch Shark Tank for anyone in the company can bring in ideas. There's a lot of benefits of having that kind of open net. You got to consider, does this person really, do they have the right mindset more than anything? It's like, do they go in, are they like passionate about the problem, but they haven't fallen in love with the solution yet? Do they understand like what it's going to take to experiment? So, and test and learn. So considering the person is important. considering strategic fit, we'll talk about that in terms of priorities, is really important because this is an established business. So it's not, this would be a great idea for anyone to do, right? That's the question for a VC. It's actually, is this a great idea that we in particular should do? Very different question for an established company. So you got to think about that in green lighting. But the overall rule in green lighting is what I call minimal deliberation and minimal funding, right? So you want to spend as little time, you want the process to be as lightweight as possible to decide who gets greenlit. And then you want to give those who get started as little as possible in terms of time and money in the first round. So it's not this big high stakes. Well, oh, we've got to like look at the data and we got to know at least does it have a chance? What's the odds of success of this versus that? You don't know, but don't sweat it. You're giving them $5 or $10,000 in 90 days. It's like, it's fine. Just like say, interesting strategic problem. I wouldn't have thought of that solution, but you have a reason why you think it might be worth exploring. Go for it, right? Let's go for it. So green lighting, and then we go into the other part of resource allocation, which is this iterative funding. And so you've got the problem here is then all of a sudden companies will set up a green lighting process, and then they just fall back into traditional BAU, business as usual budgeting, which is like these long cycles, typically annual budgeting. And it's complete mismatch for experimentation. So you have to create a parallel funding model where you've got dedicated pools of resources that you're pulling from, and they're being given out on these short, commonly, depending on what you're building. This is one of the things I know from different industries and companies. If you're building a lightweight app, you could give them 2 months, not even 90 days of resourcing between rounds. If you're building something for an industrial sector, you may say, or where there's a whole lot of stakeholders, even before you build the very first illustrative MVP, there's like a lot of people you're going to talk to. You might give them a little longer, but short rounds, come back. Each meeting with the board, you define, okay, if we approve, we're giving you another round of resourcing and time. What do we need to know next, right? So we agree with the team, what do we need to validate next? What do we need to learn next? Come back with this data at our next meeting. And then based on that, the board, and here's where those decision rights come into play. Until the next meeting, the team has complete autonomy and control of its work, right? Guardrails, don't break the law, right? Give some very specific guardrails, and then it is up to them. Who's the customer? What's the feature? What do you build next? Every iteration, it's entirely up to them. They know the definition of success. They know what they've got to bring back at your next meeting, right? They know what they're held accountable for. And then it is the board's decision on whether to refund, whether to fund it again in the next round.
David, can I just make sure our audience are clear that that's the innovation board and not the board of the organization?
Yes, when you think about who the innovation board is. So unless your company is maybe 50 people, 100 people, okay, then your innovation board might be the same as your, management board or something. But if you're talking about a large scale organization, the board cannot be the board of directors. It should not be the senior leadership of the whole company, because the one other thing the board's members have to have, what do they need? They need some experience. They need different perspectives and insight. They can advise the teams. They need some understanding of iterative funding and experimentation and how does this kind of process, like a venture capital funding model, work. But they also need to have the bandwidth, right? And this is the problem when you get too senior. You get people, it's like it's two things you need. You want clout. You do need to have at least one person on the board who's got some clout in the organization, who can go to bat for you, right? But if you get a whole bunch of the people from the top tier one, you're overflowing with clout. That's great, but they have no bandwidth to actually pay attention to you, like listen to you and give you advice. And that's the problem with going too senior. And I do see companies try that.
I was reading about shutdowns in your book, Smart Shutdowns. What
Well,
came to mind, and this is the weird mind that I have, I think, in metaphor, was that old movie, Old Yeller. When they have to put down the dog, and it's like, come on, Yeller. Because a Family Guy did a skit of this, and Yeller's like, no, 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 I did nothing wrong. So Like, come on, yeah, there time you've laughed
Oh,
at that kid. It's time to put you down.
yeah.
And this is a little bit what happens with the smart shutdown, particularly if you've made the error of having that single sponsor earlier on.
Yeah. Yeah. So shutdowns are one of the hardest parts of innovation governance in companies, in established companies. And there's a number of reasons. Part of it is right. If you do have a single sponsor, you've got them overly attached to it. Part of it is this misconception that if an idea fails, if it doesn't pan out when you test it, that that's a terrible thing, right? Just automatically, as opposed to, well, how much did it actually cost us? Like, how much resources did we lose? How much time, money, people? Did we get any value or learning out of it? It's just like, oh, was shut down. That must be a disaster. It's a sort of psychological assumption. Whereas if you are doing smart shutdowns, you're going to have most of the shutdowns happen with very little cost and with a significant amount of learning. And then the last part is this sort of if you are the one being shut down, right? You're on the team, it's seen, perceived and may very well be, in fact, a strike against you in terms of your career, right? And your next, what's available to you next inside the company. So those are the things we have to address. You've got to make shutdowns, first of all, be a norm, an expected norm that you have to understand that if you're shutting things down quickly and cheaply, which is the first rule of what I call a smart failure, right? It's not just enough to fail fast. If you're in a big company, you have to fail smart. And the first thing there is that means did we fail? It's okay if the idea didn't work, as long did we fail as cheaply and as early as possible, right? And you keep pushing yourself on that. So you don't want to get to that point and say, gosh, we should have been able to see this 6 months ago and $1 million ago. The data was all there. We just finally admitted it today. If you're doing that, the costs are not high at all. So smart shutdowns, you make it a process, you make it a norm. You go in and you start with projections of survival rates. You say, here's our innovation process for this set of projects or efforts or initiatives in the company. And here are the milestones. And we expect 50% will stop at milestone one. And then another of those who make it through, another 50% will stop at milestone two. And after that, we've got some pretty good, strong ideas. The remaining milestones will probably shut down 10 or 20% more. So you set up this expectations. People are comfortable with it. Then you go out of your way to, as I say, celebrate smart failure. You spotlight and recognize, and I have stories in the book of companies who do this extremely well, that a well managed project that you shut down is actually a great thing and something we should all learn from, right? So you make it not just something people have to hide on their resume, but something you actually literally in public forums get up and praise when you're talking about innovation and growth, and not even at some separate failure party. You can do that, but I prefer where it's at the same place where you're talking about your innovation successes. You're also talking about your successful shutdowns and what was done right and how we need to learn from that. So and then you have to follow through. You have to really be that the people who are on those projects don't get then cast into the wilderness, or they're not allowed at least to do an innovation project anytime soon. You actually put them on the next one, right? This is what good companies do. Google, Susan Wojcicki went from a disaster, it was as a product disaster. It wasn't that expensive, but Google Answers was her a project that was going to be like Quora, exciting new product, completely flopped in the market. They pushed, just couldn't get it to work. Okay. She did not get like sent back to do boring stuff. She was put on the next interesting new product they were working on, or one of the interesting ones was Google AdSense, right? AdSense went on to become one of the biggest sources of profit for Google, right, in their core business model. So they might not have found that without, they weren't willing to take the talent that had just been on a project that did not work in the market and reassign them. So you got to have that mechanism where the people who are working on if the project doesn't pan out, the venture proves out to be disproves the hypotheses. There's not a market for this. As long as that was managed properly, that's not a failure at all for the person. It's like as Vanessa Colella, when she was at Citi and was talking with me about innovation, she said it's distinguishing people from projects. The project is being shut down, not the people. So you reassign the people to the next interesting project. Doing this right makes shutdowns much easier, and it overcomes all these biases that we have inside our organizations. And it's so critical.
For those people who have been following us from day one, from the first session, and for those people who have signed up for David's Substack, you'll know that he's very generous with his tools. He's always releasing blogs on a regular basis. And if you're a pro member, you'll get these tools. And the tools are available in the book. One of the tools that is absolutely core for governance is the
Mhm.
innovation stack. And I'm going to share that on the screen now for you. And Dave is going to kindly take us through it. This is something, this whole governance element, that is so overlooked that we abandoned all my other notes for today's session because this is so important. And I really want people, it's kind of like, I often think about David as I call it the Disneyland queue effect. You think you're at the top of the queue, and then you realize, oh no, there's a whole other side over there, and then it bends over itself, and you're miles from the end. Or else you get to the end, and actually it all tumbles down. You go, what did I just spend the last year or two doing? So this happens to so
Yeah.
many of us. So getting this part right for the
Yeah.
organization, and this is why the whole organization needs to be involved, is absolutely core. So over to you, David, to take us through the corporate innovation stack.
So the innovation stack, this is, as you look at governance, this is a model, a tool I offer to bring all these different pieces together. And if you're going to set them up inside your organization. And the first element of the stack is to just understand there's really three layers you need to have here, right? So first, the first layer, as I would call it, is the team. So the teams are the people who are actually doing the work of innovation. Each team at any given time is focused on one, what I would call a growth venture. That could be a product innovation. It could be a process innovation. It could be something external facing to your customers. It could be internal, right? I was just working with the head of supply chain for a major healthcare company, and her whole focus was about digital innovation of their supply chain for internal stakeholders. But you've got a team who's working on a venture. The second layer is the board. So we talked about this. This is the innovation board, the growth board, or whatever you want to call it. But this is a small group that is overseeing a group of different teams, right? So one board has a few members and they are looking at multiple teams, green lighting them, uh, advising, counseling them, and then going through this iterative funding where they decide each time they meet with one of these teams, does it make sense to give you more resources and more time to keep going forward on this, or is it time for a smart shutdown? And then this all sits within what I call the third layer of the stack, an innovation structure. And an innovation structure is basically provides two things to the board and the teams. One is it provides a pool of resources. So this is the first question I hear when I tell, especially CFOs, you've got to have this iterative funding model and so forth. And then they say, okay, but where are they, as they're making all these agile decisions on every week or a month or so, as they're having meetings with teams outside the annual budgeting process, where are they getting the money from? Well, you have to have a dedicated pool of resources. That's going to be money. And it may be people who are full time working in this process of innovation and exploration. And then, in addition to the resources, you need to have governance rules, right? Because different kinds of innovation opportunities are going to have to be managed differently within different, an established business. I talked broadly, I think we touched on this in part one, about three paths to growth. So the key here is first path, right? This is the easy part. This is innovation within the core, sort of low uncertainty, well-defined problems in your core business. You manage that according to your usual processes. That's like, go for it. Don't need to change anything. Don't, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, as the saying goes, right? But a lot of innovation cannot work with that normal business as usual management. So then you've got two different kinds that need to be managed differently and will require this kind of innovation stack. Path two is any opportunity that is part of your core business, right? But the uncertainty is high. And then path three is things that are actually outside of your core business. So each of those needs actually somewhat different management support, as I would call it. In terms of path two, the challenge here is you've got to actually, well, the broken model is to say, let's give it to an innovation team. They'll go build this thing for us, for we're the core business, and then bring it back to us, right? That's what in the IT delivery business is called build it and throw it over the wall, right? It's like, give us the specs, tell us what you want. We'll go off for 6, 12, 18 months, build some digital thingy, and then say, here it is, what you asked for, right? This always fails. So instead, you need a governance model where both the funding and the people actually doing the innovation have to be a mix of some representation and some funding from the core business. So they both have skin in the game, right? That's the money. And their perspective of what is and is really not going to work in the core business is there. They're sitting on the team. That is part of the team. The team doesn't have to go outside to get that perspective. And you plan from the very beginning that there's going to be a certain point, a certain milestone where you've gone far enough in iterating the solution that you're going to hand it back to the core. Now it's ready for them to actually run with it and scale it up. You've taken out most of the uncertainty, right? Then path 3 innovations they have different challenges. Remember, this is an opportunity, a growth opportunity that is outside of your core business, right? You are a journalism business, a newspaper business, and you see an opportunity to spin out your games, which used to be crossword puzzles in the print edition. Now you realize this could actually be a separate app with a separate subscription and create a new revenue stream, right? That would be the New York Times. Or you're a retailer doing pure e-commerce and you're rebuilding your own technology infrastructure. And somebody proposes, hey, this new system we're building works so well, it's very scalable, it's resilient, couldn't we sell this as a service to other people, right? Go into a B2B kind of cloud computing services offering. Whoa, this is Amazon Web Services. First day it was proposed by Benjamin Black in Amazon, way outside the current business. Current business is retail, right? So those kinds of ideas have to be managed differently as well. They don't need the core involved. The whole problem is there is nobody in the core to whom this idea would fit or own. They would be a natural home for it. And so you need to manage those differently, and they need to have a different kind of oversight and thought from the very beginning about if this actually succeeds, if this really goes to scale, where does that go inside the organization? How do we think about creating maybe even a new business unit for it, or maybe merging it back in eventually into part of the core business? So this is why we need that top level of the innovation stack. Innovation structures are set up to either manage, I suggest either the mandate should be path 2. So this is tackling innovation opportunities in the core business, maybe one particular business unit of the core, right? Because you can have different innovation structures and really working hand in glove with the core business on every one of these ventures. None of them get started. No team gets greenlit without the approval of someone from that part of the business, that business unit, right? And people from that business unit are part of, maybe probably not all of, but are part of the team that goes out and iteratively builds the solution. And then you would have different innovation structures that are set up, one or maybe more, to go after ideas outside of your current core business. And these can take different shapes. Sometimes that's just through venture capital investing, or it's M&A, right? You've got a strategic M&A team that's looking for opportunities to buy a firm that's going to give you an entry point into a new market or something like that. It can be startup accelerators. It can be innovation labs. It can be hackathons, lots of different kind of processes, but all of these have what they should have in common to be an effective innovation structure is they've got resourcing attached to them, and they have governance rules that are specific, that are suited to the kind of innovation that they're trying to do in that mandate. And then within that structure, they've got one or more innovation boards, and they've got the ability to form innovation teams. And that's how these sort of 3 layers, you have to have all 3 layers of the stack coming together if you're going to have this really work on a repeatable basis in an established business.
After much deliberation, I had to almost run David's process to decide what not to do today, to do priorities, which we're going to skip. So we're going to skip vision, which is absolutely core. We touched on it a little bit in part 1. We're going to skip priorities. We touched on that a tiny bit, which is so, so important, trying to whittle down where you actually decide where to place your energy. And we're going to go into validation of new ventures because this is the step that comes before scaling. And
Hmm.
such an important aspect. There's a case study David opens up with here, much like we talked about in part one about CNN Plus and about New
Yeah.
York Times. This is the great story of Walmart, a company that is doing a great job of validating new ventures and trying things, iterating, et cetera, frugally as well, I might add. So we're going to open with
Yeah.
that story. We've only got 10 minutes left, and then we're going to go into the 4 stages of validation.
Great. So Walmart is a great example of an established business and seeing a strategic opportunity. So that would be in the priority section. So one of the things they identified as really important to them was to innovate and really try to capture the space of online ordering of groceries. And whole separate discussion why that is particularly strategically important for Walmart, but they did the thinking, clear reasons to go after it. Now, they were smart in that they knew they would not know what would work, right? They did not try to go out and do a whole lot of benchmarking and business case writing and third-party data and come up with a big detailed plan of how is Walmart going to do online grocery ordering. They said, "No, we don't know. We're gonna have to test. We're gonna have to learn. We're gonna iterate. We're gonna try different approaches." All right? They tried different things. They looked at different delivery models, right? Do we farm that out? Do we have a third party, an app, a delivery service like an Instacart or a DoorDash or somebody? They do delivery part, we create the ordering experience and blah, blah, blah. They looked at, do we hire our own drivers, right? They looked at who'll be a Walmart force of people driving around delivering your groceries. They even tested a model where they had employees. You're checking out people who work in a store. You're leaving the store at the end of the day and you check out your timestamp with your phone and you enter where am I going to next, right? You enter the location and you get a message says, "Oh, if you're going there, maybe your home, maybe someone friend's house, if that's where you're going, would you take this delivery on your way and drop it off at this customer's home?" And you'll be paid. You'll get a little bonus, a little overtime pay for doing that if you do. Was another delivery model. So they tried different delivery models, didn't know which would scale, which would work. They also tried different pricing. And this is critical. This is the difference between the Instacart, between the venture-backed business that's expected to take 7, maybe 10 years to reach profitability, right? That's the name of the game with VC capital. You're a Walmart, you're any established business, you don't have that long for the idea to prove out that it's actually not losing money, but making a profit, adding value to the company, right? So they say it's got to make money. It's got to make money not immediately, not first quarter, reasonably soon. Before we know it's a scalable, profitable business model. And we don't know what's going to be the right path, right? So they set out and they said, we're going to try different things. We're going to be willing to try, is it different price points to order, to pay for delivery? If you don't want to pay, they said, well, what if we offer different minimum basket sizes? They tested each of these things, lots of different price points. They also tested a membership model, right? Well, maybe people would rather pay one upfront sum for a year-long membership than every grocery delivery order is free, right? The one thing they knew they couldn't afford to do is just say, oh, it's free, any size order. So they tested all these things. And well, one of the things they learned was there was a segment who liked the idea of the membership model. It's like Amazon Prime, right? Pay the annual fee, unlimited delivery, and then there's some extra benefits that they added in as well to sweeten the deal. So they got some customers on that, and they found that was actually a scalable, profitable model. But then there were other customers who didn't want to do that at all. They said, I don't want to pay. I don't want to pay per delivery. I don't want to pay annual fee. I just don't want to pay at all. So they said, okay, what if you meet us halfway, so to speak, to the customer? We will give you a great online ordering experience, right? An app that you can pull up and it's got your data, remembers your past orders, makes recommendations, makes it very easy to put together your list of all the things you might need right now, saves all your information. You just tap go. And then our people in Walmart will go up and down the aisles of the grocery section and we'll pull off all the products, we'll put them in the bags, we'll get everything ready for you. There's just one thing you have to do. You have to drive to Walmart, right? Now, part of why Walmart, this was a good strategy, or why they were uniquely well positioned to deliver this particular strategy, is because one of the unique strategic advantages of Walmart is their close proximity to the customer. in North America, in the US, 90% of the population lives within 10 miles of a Walmart. So this is not such an unfeasible, ridiculous ask of the customer. Okay, just drive by a Walmart, right? Now, you don't even have to get out of the car, right? You park in a special parking spot. We bring the groceries out. We put them in the back of your trunk and off you go. That really hit with a different segment of customers who really like that experience. This was actually already in testing and deployment before COVID hit. Now, of course, when COVID hit, demand with quarantine, demand for online grocery ordering skyrocketed. The first model, they could not scale fast enough. You could not hire enough delivery people to suddenly meet all the demand. But the second model, the what's called click and collect, buy online, pick up at store, was something they could scale. So that became really important to the business. Customer behaviors, expectations keep changing. They keep iterating and experimenting new things. One of the more recent models they tested, they found that there's a certain customer segment who will pay a premium, not just to have you deliver the groceries to them and leave it on their doorstep where the ice cream might start to melt, or if you're me, your sorbet starts to melt. You'll pay extra to actually have a uniformed Walmart employee bring the groceries into your home, put them away in your cupboards, your freezer, your refrigerator for you, right? They call this Walmart in-home. So they continue to experiment, try, see what works, see what doesn't, change, shut things down, start new things up, continually learning from the market.
So there's two final pieces we're going to have time to share. The first is the 4 stages of validation that we mentioned, and then I mentioned all those tools that David has. He's worked on these for years through the scar tissue of experience with executives and also their scar tissue of failing with so many transformation efforts. So first up, we have the 4 stages of validation, and then we're going to share the Rogers Growth Navigator. Over to you, David.
Great. So the four stages really arose from a common problem I found, which is once teams and business leaders and corporate innovators really embrace the idea of experimentation and that you don't know going in what's going to work and you've got to test and try things and build iteratively in short cycles. And really, they embrace this idea of not writing a business plan, but writing down all your unknowns, your hypotheses, right? Your business model hypotheses. What happens is you've got a lot of unknowns at the start, right? They're like, wait, well, which feature should I build first? What price should I charge? Who's my customer? Who's my competition? Does anyone actually care about this problem I think I'm solving, right? Is the technology going to work? Will regulators approve? Is compliance and legal and so forth? So many questions you don't know. And so then the problem becomes at the start of the journey, it's where do we start, right? What do we do? How do we sequence all this iteration? You can't run 100 different MVP tests in your first 90 days. So it's, well, what do we do first? And this is where I found it helpful to develop this model based on studying the innovation process of many, many different companies in different categories of what I call the 4 stages of validation, right? And the point here is all of these things have to be learned before if you're going to have a repeatable, scalable, profitable business model, right? But you don't learn them all at the same time. So the first question you have to, this is very high level and there's a lot of details under each of these, but the first broad question you have to answer is, are we focused on a genuine problem for an actual customer, right? You have to go out and get data to confirm. And that is the stage I call problem validation. That is actually the one that is most commonly skipped over. People start just jumping to doing wireframes or building a working prototype or gaming out the pricing and blah, blah, blah. You got to confirm what is the problem you're solving, who's the customer, do they see it the same way as you? Next, as you start to get some confirmation, some data, a lot of conversations with customers, and you're starting to confirm that, okay, what do we need to learn next? Once we're getting some confirmation on the problem and who the customer is. Next is, does the customer see value in our proposed solution? And I'll underline the word proposed. You are not yet building a working solution for them. You're just sketching out, hey, we're thinking of building an app like this, a dashboard like this, creating a service like this, a training program like X. And you define what is expected and you see what is the level of demand that generates. Is the customer knocking on your door and saying, how soon can I have this? What's the price? Send me the bill. Or are they saying, oh, that's nice. Keep me posted. Translation, I don't care. I'm too busy to worry about this thing you're planning, right? This stage is what I call solution validation. Once you start to confirm that, you start to really show there's demand from the market, classic sort of indicators of product market fit. They want it. They're willing to put in even down a deposit, perhaps. They're putting some skin in the game. Now you're ready to start what I call product validation. That's the third stage. And here, what you need to discover is, can we deliver a solution that customers use? So now this is an important shift in kind of MVPs or that you're building. So before it was things like wireframes, just illustrative mock-ups, explainer videos, things that sort of show what the thing would be. Now you actually have to deliver your very first, just barely working product. I think it's Mark Randolph, co-founder of Netflix, who calls it the minimum unattractive or ugly or I forget, MUP, like the really not a very attractive, compelling product. What I say is it gives that baseline value proposition. It actually has to give the most slimmest version of the benefit to the customer, right? And then you actually see, how do they really use it? It's very different often between what people say they want or think they want, and then you give it to them. How do they adopt it? How do they use it? Where do they use it? When do they use it? And can you deliver it? All sorts of operational issues start to emerge here, and you learn all kinds of things you will not know until you're actually in the market with a limited number of customers in a very first pilot where they're actually using it in the real content, right? Once that starts to happen, and then you keep iterating and building it out from this really crummy, early, ugly, what I still call a functional MVP. It does actually do the job, that gets better and more full featured and more polished and more scalable. Then you're ready for the last stage of validation, which is to ask, can we capture sufficient value from this innovation? Right? It's not just, can we make money, right? Can we generate revenue? This is corporate innovation. It might be a cost saving. It might be mitigating a risk to the company. There's some way you're capturing value. And it's not just enough you capture some. You got to say, look, given the scale of our business, what matters to us strategically, what other opportunities we have to invest, where our core business is and so forth, is this worth taking it further, right? That's the question of business validation, the fourth stage. So these are all iterative. Each one keeps going, so they layer on and build on top of each other. It's not a stage gate. You don't finish one stage and then start the next, but you begin with problem validation. As you get some confirmation there, then you start up solution validation. As you get good data there and know the path you're on, then you start product validation, and then you start business validation. And what I've seen in experience is this brings a lot of clarity to the process for teams in established companies.
I'll show on the screen for those people who are watching us just the depth of these tools as well, and I'll show the Rogers Growth Navigator there just to show how this builds on that. And again, buy the book. These tools are in there. Sign up for David's Substack, and he gives you these tools as part of that. But I just wanted to mention a couple of examples that you share. You mentioned Randolph there from Netflix, and how cheaply you can actually start the journey. So maybe we'll share just his example. So mailing the DVD, and then diapers.com, which is a great example.
Sure. And I'll just say, since you've got it on the screen, is you can see if you zoom in that the Growth Navigator tool, it's just a visual tool to guide you through these four stages. And what I find is so helpful is everybody on the team and also those sponsors, the board, the innovation board, you want everyone to have a shared set of facts. So this tool allows you at any given moment, every week, as you're iterating and pushing along further, to have one place where you say, here are our business model hypotheses, right? This is what we're assuming. We don't know. Here's what data we have. Here's what we actually validated now up to this point. And here's what we need to learn now. Having that visual tool gives you that shared viewpoint of, okay, where exactly are we on this learning journey and where are we going to go next to iterate? Great point about it is so iterative. You can learn so much very early on in some cases. So Mark Randolph and Reed Hastings, this is very early days of Netflix. One of the things, remember their first business model, this is what they're trying to validate at this point, is the DVDs by mail, right? That was the original business model. And it's about that operation. Remember, I said in product validation, it's not just the customer will use, but we can deliver it. Well, they had to figure out what's it going to take to be sending all these DVDs. One of the key questions was, can we just use regular US Postal Service, right? The cheapest rates available for sending. And will it go through without breaking, right? Are we going to have lots of expensive padding, which then adds weight? And then there's a higher charge for everyone we send. All they did was they didn't even actually take a DVD. They took a physical disc. It was a music CD-ROM. It was Patsy Cline's greatest hit, right? So I don't know, that was what they had on in the car. They put it in a pink greeting card envelope that they bought at a store, and then they just took that and they dropped it in the mailbox on the street corner in their town in Santa Cruz and mailed it to themselves. And they just wanted to see, like, does it get there and is it broken or not, right? Super, super cheap test, super simple, 24 hours, and they learned something that was really critical to thinking about, okay, can we take this idea forward? The other example you gave, diapers.com. So this is in the earlier days of e-commerce. Amazon was already up and running, but Amazon started as a bookstore and they were gradually starting to move out into other categories of things you could order and have delivered. But they were not yet the everything store, right? So e-commerce is still growing. These two dads, Mark Laurie and Vinit Barara. So they're new dads. They've got babies at home, right? They're both married. And they're thinking about all of a sudden they're buying all these diapers and other baby stuff, all this stuff they didn't buy until all of a sudden right now. And they're entrepreneurs and they're thinking, hey, there ought to be an e-commerce solution for this because there wasn't one at that point. And so they said, yeah, it'll be like diapers.com and you can order the diapers, all the diapers you need, and then we'll add on extra, all the other baby products you need. But we start with the diapers because that's the thing everyone knows they needs and you keep needing it. Frequency of purchase is always a key element in e-commerce. They knew that. So they said this could work, but I don't know, would it? So the very first MVP, the first test that they built was just this. The two guys, they posted on Facebook. That was the top social media at this time. 4 accounts, their 2 personal accounts and their wives' 2 personal accounts. So just their friends, and they just posted, said, hey, Mark and Vinit are starting a new business. We are providing online delivery of diapers. If you'd like to save yourself your next trip to the store, just message us and tell us what brand you want, what model you want, what size you want, and the quantity, and tell us the best price that you've seen at another store. We'll match it and, give us your address and we'll follow up to charge you over the phone and we'll get it to you. And they went to bed. And they woke up in the morning and they had, I think it was 240 orders from just their personal network. So when you have babies, very typically you have a lot of peers who are having babies around the same time. So they're like, oh my gosh, we got to get to work. So the two of them and their wives spent the next day driving around to every big box store in their area, buying up on this list of all the different models and types that they needed, and then taking it home and then getting boxes and packaging them all up and then driving in their minivans to the UPS or the FedEx, whichever it was, getting all these orders delivered. Now, obviously, you don't yet have a scalable model, right? That's the thing about early MVPs. They work, but they're not scalable. You don't really know the economics yet, but they learned a lot in 48 hours. Most important, they learned there is a market, right? They weren't just smoking something. This isn't something they imagined or just they're the only ones who want it. Customers want it. But they even learned other things like which brands do people order? Which models do they like, right? Classic merchandising questions are critical to any retail business. But also like frequency. You should give people this option. Do they order diapers for a week or do they order diapers for a month, right? How large are the order size? So a lot of data they got very quickly, very cheaply. And that's the mindset. When you're building these iterative MVPs, as I call them, it's not, you got to shift, particularly in the early days, shift your thinking. You're not building a product, right? You are building a test. You're trying to learn the next most important thing you need to learn about this business opportunity. And that's really what this process of iterative of validation is all about.
I was just thinking about if that was me and we just had a baby and I decided to start this business and then my wife has to help me fulfill the orders, I can imagine her just staring at me going, I am gonna kill you. I'm barely keeping up.
Why are you doing this?
All right,
Yes.
man. Well,
Yeah.
well, it
Well,
was such a pleasure to spend time with you. I also spent a lot of time with you because I listened to the audiobook as well as read the book, which is a way just for me to get a second bite at the cherry and understand
yeah.
information even more. And David
Yeah.
voices this audiobook and does a great job of that as well. So I highly
Thank
recommend
you.
that. David, where can people find you to find out more? You do executive coaching or executive training. You do keynotes. You are prolific writer and content creator and a sharer of that content as well. Where's the best place people can reach out and find you?
So the best place to find me is just start on my website. It's davidrogers.digital. So not the .com, .net, the usual. Now we can pick our own domains. So it's David Rogers, Rogers .digital. You can find information there about my services for companies, advising, keynote speaking, work with boards, etc. And then also, you can find right on the homepage, any page you scroll down to, you'll see a link to sign up or subscribe. And that will give you the option to sign up for my newsletter. And that's a Substack that goes out every week. And as you said, you sign up, you get a first chapter of the book. And if you sign up for the pro account, which is actually first 30 days is free, you get the bunch of strategic tools, you get additional chapter from my previous book and more information. But mostly I'm writing there and publishing every week and sharing content, stories, case studies, interviews with executives and business leaders about really what it takes to do digital transformation that really makes a difference in your business.
And it absolutely does. As I said to you right when I first read it, I was like, "Oh, I wish I had this book 2 decades ago to join me on my journey." But it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for spending this amount of time. I really appreciate your time. Author of the Digital Transformation Roadmap, David Rogers. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Aidan. It's been a true pleasure.